What happened 72 hours ago will be studied in military academies for the next 50 years, and yet most Americans have no idea it even occurred. In the span of a single week, Iran executed a strategic maneuver so consequential, so precisely calculated that it has fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Middle East in a way that cannot be reversed. This is not hyperbole. This is not speculation. This is structural analysis of a development that Western intelligence agencies are currently in emergency session trying to comprehend. And every answer they are finding is deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. What you are about to hear represents the culmination of a 25-year strategic preparation that began the moment American forces invaded Iraq in 2003. While America was focused on regime change and spreading democracy, Iran was building something far more dangerous than nuclear weapons, far more destabilizing than any single weapon system. Iran built a network of integrated military capabilities across 6 countries that now functions as a unified strategic entity, and the final piece of that network just locked into place. Let me be very clear about what we are examining tonight. 3 questions will drive everything that follows, and by the end of this analysis, you will understand why the strategic equation has changed in a way that has no precedent in modern Middle Eastern history. First, what exactly did Iran do, and why did Western intelligence completely miss the strategic significance until it was already operational? Second, what does this development mean for American military options in the region? And why does every war game scenario now end in outcomes Washington cannot accept? Third, what happens next, and why are we watching the early stages of a regional transformation that will reshape global power dynamics for decades? There are no comfortable answers tonight, but the truth, however brutal, is the only thing worth examining. Let me take you inside every dimension of this moment. Here is what happened, and here is why it matters more than any missile test or nuclear facility you have been hearing about for the last 20 years. Between November 2024 and January 2025, Iran completed the full integration of what military strategists are now calling the Axis of Resistance Command Network. This is not a political alliance. This is not a loose coalition of proxy forces. This is a unified military command structure linking Hezbollah in Lebanon, Syrian military units, Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces, Yemeni Ansarullah forces, and Iranian Revolutionary Guard units into a single operational entity with coordinated intelligence sharing, integrated air defense systems, and synchronized strategic planning. The final component that made this network operational was the deployment of Russian S-400 air defense systems to 4 critical locations across this network, coupled with Chinese YJ-21 anti-ship hypersonic missiles positioned in Yemen and southern Iraq. These systems became fully operational in the first week of January 2025. The deployment was conducted in stages over 18 months, disguised as separate transactions and technical assistance programs. Western intelligence detected individual components, but failed to recognize they were watching the assembly of an integrated system. Let me give you the technical specifications that explain why this changes everything. The S-400 air defense system has a maximum engagement range of 400 kilometers and can simultaneously track 300 targets while engaging 36. When you position these systems at 4 strategic locations covering Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Western Iran, you create an overlapping air defense umbrella that extends from the Mediterranean coast to the Persian Gulf. This umbrella makes American air superiority, which has been the foundation of American military power in the Middle East since 1991, operationally compromised across the entire northern Middle East. The YJ-21 anti-ship hypersonic missile has a range of 1,500 kilometers and travels at Mach 10 in its terminal phase. It was specifically designed to defeat American carrier battle group defenses. When you position these missiles in Yemen, covering the Red Sea approach, and southern Iraq covering the Persian Gulf approach, you create a two-ocean denial zone that makes American carrier operations in both the Red Sea and Persian Gulf extraordinarily high risk. Here is the cost-exchange ratio that should terrify Pentagon planners. Each YJ-21 missile costs approximately $4 million. Each American aircraft carrier represents a $90 billion asset when you include the carrier itself, the air wing, and the escort vessels. The military term for this is asymmetric advantage, but that phrase does not capture the strategic reality. Iran and its network can now credibly threaten American naval assets worth trillions of dollars with weapon systems costing billions. The exchange ratio favors the defender by multiple orders of magnitude, but the weapon systems are only half the story. Let me explain what makes this network truly unprecedented. Traditional military alliances involve separate national militaries that coordinate during specific operations. NATO functions this way. What Iran has built is something categorically different. This is a unified command structure where intelligence flows in real time between all components, where strategic decisions are made at a central command level, and where military operations are synchronized across 6 countries as if they were divisions of a single military force. The intelligence integration is particularly significant. When Israeli aircraft take off from bases in Israel, that information is detected by Syrian radar systems, transmitted through the network to Iranian command, analyzed using Russian intelligence protocols, and disseminated to all network components within 90 seconds. When American naval vessels move through the Strait of Hormuz, Yemeni coastal monitoring stations track those movements and feed targeting data to Iraqi missile units. The entire network functions as a single organism with distributed sensory systems and coordinated response capability. This is what 25 years of methodical preparation looks like when you are not distracted by the urgent and instead remain focused on the essential. While America spent 2 decades on counterterrorism operations, Iran built the foundations of an integrated regional military structure. While American defense policy churned through multiple administrations with completely different strategic priorities every 4 to 8 years, Iran maintained consistent strategic focus across an entire generation. Now, we need to examine what this means for American military options. And here is where the analysis becomes deeply uncomfortable for anyone invested in American strategic dominance. Every American military contingency plan for Iran over the last 20 years has been premised on air superiority. The assumption has been that American air power could systematically degrade Iranian military capabilities, destroy nuclear facilities, eliminate missile sites, and ultimately coerce Iran into compliance through sustained bombing campaigns. This assumption is now operationally invalid. Let me walk you through what an American air campaign against Iran would now encounter. American aircraft entering the operational zone would immediately face integrated air defense systems with overlapping coverage areas, making traditional suppression of enemy air defenses enormously costly. American stealth aircraft, which have been designed to defeat individual air defense systems through low observability, would be operating in an environment with multiple overlapping radar systems using different frequencies and detection methodologies. The mathematical reality of probability means that detection likelihood increases exponentially when you have multiple independent sensor systems covering the same airspace. Even if American forces achieved temporary air superiority through massive strikes against air defense systems, the network structure means those systems can be reconstituted from inventory reserves positioned across 6 countries. You cannot destroy the entire network without conducting military operations across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Iran simultaneously. That is not an air campaign. That is a regional war involving ground operations across territories totaling 3 million square kilometers. The naval dimension is equally problematic. American carrier battle groups have been the primary tool for force projection in the Middle East since Operation Desert Storm. These carrier groups now face an integrated anti-ship missile threat from multiple axes that would require defensive operations far exceeding historical engagement scenarios. Let me give you the numbers that explain the defensive challenge. A single American carrier battle group typically includes approximately 48 SM-2 and SM-6 interceptor missiles on each Aegis cruiser, with 2 to 3 cruisers per battle group. That provides roughly 100 to 150 interceptor missiles for anti-ship missile defense. The integrated network can now launch coordinated anti-ship missile strikes from Yemen, Iraq, and Iran simultaneously, potentially involving hundreds of missiles in a single salvo. The defensive mathematics do not work. The defender runs out of interceptors before the attacker runs out of missiles. The strategic implication is that American naval power projection in the Persian Gulf and Red Sea is now contingent on the network's decision not to engage. American forces can operate in these waters only with the implicit permission of the integrated network, a complete reversal of the power dynamic that has existed since 1991. Here is what this means in practice. If America attempts military action against Iran, Iran does not fight that war as an isolated nation defending its own territory. Iran fights that war as the command center of a unified military structure with forces positioned across the entire Middle East. American forces would simultaneously face Hezbollah operations against Israel, Iraqi militia operations against American bases in Iraq and Syria, Yemeni operations against shipping in the Red Sea, and direct Iranian operations in the Persian Gulf. This is not a war with Iran. This is a war with an integrated network spanning from the Mediterranean to the Arabian Sea. Let me show you the historical pattern that makes this development even more significant than the technical military analysis suggests. Throughout history, empires have collapsed not when they lost a single decisive battle, but when they reached the point where the costs of maintaining imperial control exceeded the benefits of imperial power. Rome did not fall in a day. Rome fell over centuries as the cost of defending increasingly indefensible frontiers exceeded the economic capacity to sustain those costs. The British Empire did not end with military defeat. The British Empire ended when Britain could no longer afford to maintain military forces across dozens of colonies while rebuilding a war-devastated homeland. America is approaching that inflection point in the Middle East, and what Iran has just accomplished accelerates that timeline dramatically. Let me walk through the economic realities that explain why this network creates unsustainable cost structures for American power projection. America currently maintains approximately 60,000 military personnel across the Middle East, including bases in Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. These forces exist to ensure regional stability, protect oil flows, and deter Iranian aggression. The annual cost of maintaining this military presence exceeds $80 billion when you include personnel, equipment, logistics, and operational expenses. The integrated network that Iran has built means that every one of those American bases and every American military asset in the region is now under persistent threat from coordinated attack capabilities. Defending those assets requires additional air defense systems, additional intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance assets, additional quick reaction forces, and additional logistical support. The Pentagon is currently calculating that adequate defense of existing American positions in the Middle East would require doubling the current force presence at an additional cost exceeding $70 billion annually. Here is the economic trap. America can spend $150 billion annually to defend military positions in the Middle East, or America can withdraw those forces and accept that it no longer controls events in the region. But the intermediate position, maintaining current force levels at current funding, is no longer militarily sustainable. The integrated network has eliminated the middle option. Now let me show you why this matters beyond just military positioning. Let me show you why this threatens the fundamental economic architecture of American global power. The United States dollar functions as the global reserve currency primarily because oil, the world's most traded commodity, is priced and sold in dollars. This arrangement, established in the 1970s following agreements with Saudi Arabia, means that any country that wants to buy oil must first acquire dollars. This creates persistent global demand for dollars, regardless of American economic fundamentals. This demand allows America to run enormous budget deficits and trade deficits that would be unsustainable for any other country. This entire system requires that America maintains the capacity to guarantee the security of Middle Eastern oil flows. If America cannot credibly guarantee that security, oil-producing nations will increasingly accept payment in other currencies, and oil-consuming nations will increasingly hold reserves in other currencies. The dollar's reserve currency status erodes not through formal abandonment, but through gradual diversification away from dollar dependence. The integrated network that Iran has built directly threatens American capacity to guarantee Middle Eastern oil security. Iran now has the capability to interdict oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz, through which 21 million barrels of oil pass daily, representing 21% of global petroleum consumption. Iran has the capability to threaten oil infrastructure across the Persian Gulf using the Iraqi and Yemeni components of the network. Most significantly, Iran has the capability to impose costs on American military efforts to reopen those flows that would exceed historical precedent. Let me give you the scenario that keeps Treasury Department officials awake at night. Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz using anti-ship missiles and naval mines. Oil prices immediately spike to $200 per barrel. America announces it will reopen the strait through military force. Iran, operating through the integrated network, launches coordinated attacks on oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia and the UAE while simultaneously engaging American military forces attempting to clear the strait. America faces a choice. Commit to a massive military escalation involving potentially hundreds of thousands of troops across multiple countries, or negotiate a settlement that acknowledges Iranian influence over regional oil flows. If America chooses escalation, the cost in American lives, military expenditure, and economic disruption potentially exceeds $1 trillion. If America chooses negotiation, it publicly acknowledges it cannot unilaterally guarantee Middle Eastern oil security, fundamentally undermining the petrodollar system. This is not a hypothetical scenario. This is the scenario that Pentagon and Treasury officials are currently gaming out in classified sessions. And every iteration of the scenario ends in outcomes that American policymakers consider unacceptable. This is what a strategic trap looks like when you are already inside it. Let me show you the historical parallel that explains where this goes. In 415 BCE, Athens was the dominant naval power in the Mediterranean. Athens had defeated the Persian Empire, built the Delian League into an Athenian empire, and maintained military superiority over rival Greek city-states through control of the seas. Athenian leadership, confident in their military power, decided to launch an expedition to conquer Syracuse in Sicily, expanding Athenian dominance to the western Mediterranean. The Sicilian expedition was a disaster. Athens sent its finest ships, its best generals, and thousands of its best soldiers. The expedition was destroyed. Athens lost 200 ships and 40,000 men. Athens never recovered from this defeat. Within a decade, Athens lost the Peloponnesian War and its position as the dominant power in Greece. The lesson that military historians draw from this event is not about the specific tactical errors Athens made in Sicily. The lesson is about imperial overreach and the point at which the costs of expansion exceed the capacity to sustain empire. Athens had reached that point, but did not recognize it until the catastrophe forced recognition. America is approaching its Sicilian moment in the Middle East. The integrated network that Iran has built is the strategic equivalent of the Syracusan defenses that destroyed Athenian power. America can recognize this reality and adjust its strategic posture accordingly. Or America can launch its Sicilian expedition and learn the same lesson Athens learned 2,400 years ago. Here is my prediction, and I want to be very explicit about what I am forecasting based on this structural analysis. Within the next 18 to 36 months, America will significantly reduce its military footprint in the Middle East. This reduction will not be framed as retreat or defeat. It will be framed as strategic rebalancing toward the Indo-Pacific, or rationalization of defense spending, or evolution beyond oil dependency. The framing does not matter. The substance is that America will acknowledge through action, if not through explicit statement, that it can no longer afford to maintain military dominance across the Middle East in the face of the integrated network Iran has built. This withdrawal will accelerate the diversification away from dollar-denominated oil transactions. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and other Persian Gulf states will increasingly accept Chinese yuan for oil sales. Oil-consuming nations will increasingly hold currency reserves in yuan, euros, and potentially a basket of currencies rather than predominantly dollars. This will not happen overnight. This will happen gradually over a decade, but the direction is now structurally determined. The second prediction is more immediate. Within the next 6 to 12 months, there will be a significant crisis involving the integrated network and American forces. This crisis will likely involve either an attack on American forces in Iraq or Syria, or an interdiction of American naval vessels in the Strait of Hormuz or Red Sea. This crisis will be deliberately calibrated to impose costs on America while remaining below the threshold that would trigger full-scale war. The purpose of this crisis, from Iran's strategic perspective, will be to demonstrate the operational reality of the integrated network. Iran needs American policymakers and the American public to understand that the old rules no longer apply. The most effective way to communicate that understanding is through a limited demonstration of capability that proves the integrated network is not theoretical but operational. America's response to this crisis will determine whether this transition occurs through managed accommodation or through escalation that could spiral into regional war. I assess the probability of managed accommodation at approximately 65%. American military and intelligence leadership understands the strategic realities I have outlined. The question is whether political leadership can accept those realities without demanding escalation for domestic political reasons. Let me address the obvious objection to this analysis. Many people will say that America has overwhelming military power and that technological superiority will ultimately prevail against any regional network. This objection reflects fundamental misunderstanding of how military power operates in the modern era. Military technology is not magic. Military technology is applied resources subject to mathematical constraints. America has better aircraft, better missiles, better intelligence systems than Iran. But America does not have infinite aircraft, infinite missiles, or infinite intelligence systems. America has finite resources that must be distributed across global commitments, including potential conflicts with China and Russia. Iran has built a network that can impose costs on American military operations that exceed the value of the objectives America would be pursuing. This is not about whether America could defeat Iran in a total war where America mobilized its entire economy and society for sustained combat. America obviously possesses that capability. This is about whether America will pay the cost of that victory when the costs include potentially trillions of dollars, tens of thousands of American casualties, economic recession from oil disruption, and abandonment of strategic competition with China. The answer to that question is no. America will not pay those costs for Middle Eastern objectives that are decreasingly vital to American security as America becomes energy independent. And Iran's entire strategy has been built on this calculation. This is not prophecy. This is not ideological preference. This is game theory and structural analysis applied to the strategic situation that now exists. Iran has created a cost structure that makes American military dominance in the Middle East economically unsustainable. America will adjust to that reality through some combination of accommodation, withdrawal, and strategic reorientation. Now, let me address what this means for the global order more broadly, because the implications extend far beyond the Middle East. For 75 years, the American-led global order has been premised on American capacity to project military power to any region where American interests are threatened. This capacity has been the ultimate guarantor of the international system, including freedom of navigation, security of trade routes, and enforcement of international agreements. That capacity is now being contested in the Middle East in ways that suggest it is no longer absolute. If regional powers can build integrated networks that make American military intervention prohibitively costly, other regions will observe this model and potentially replicate it. China is certainly studying Iran's approach as a potential model for contesting American power in the Western Pacific. Russia is exploring similar integrated network approaches in its near abroad. The implication is that we are watching the beginning of a transition from unipolar American dominance to a multipolar system where regional powers possess defensive capabilities that make intervention costly enough to deter American action. This transition will be destabilizing in the short term as the old order breaks down before a new equilibrium is established. We should expect increasing regional conflicts as local powers test the boundaries of their enhanced capabilities. We should expect economic volatility as markets adjust to new security realities. We should expect political turbulence within America as different factions debate how to respond to diminished global influence. But in the longer term, this transition may actually enhance global stability by creating a more balanced distribution of power where no single nation can impose its will unilaterally. History suggests that balanced multipolar systems, while featuring more frequent small conflicts, tend to avoid the catastrophic great power wars that occur when one power attempts to maintain dominance against rising challengers. Let me conclude with the framework that should guide how you think about these developments going forward. What Iran has accomplished is not the result of superior technology or greater resources. What Iran has accomplished is the result of strategic patience, consistent focus, and willingness to play a long game while adversaries were distracted by short-term urgencies. Iran identified the critical vulnerability in American power, which is the unsustainable cost of maintaining global military dominance, and built a structure specifically designed to exploit that vulnerability. America's strategic challenge is not primarily military. America's strategic challenge is economic and political.